Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Hello again, this is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, and today we're talking about books and writing and history and stuff with one of Saskatchewan's and the country's, one of Canada's preeminent historians, talking with Bill Waiser. So, Bill, you're surviving being shut in, I take it.
Actually, I'm writing.
Oh, of course.
So it works out okay. I've worked out. I'm a runner, so I got that in this morning, even though it was rather cold. I'm waiting for spring, but I usually run or walk in the morning, and then I write for the day. So yeah, I'm okay.
Oh, good. Yeah. So tell us about your early life. I looked at your bio, so it doesn't tell me where you were born and raised.
Well, my mother was a Scot, and my father was from Manitoba. And my father's family homesteaded in Manitoba. And my father served overseas in the Second World War. He saw action with the British Columbia Tank Regiment. He was a crew commander. And he drew my mother's name to write to. And they got together after the war.
Oh.
And...
There's a story there, too.
I'm one of... Pardon me?
I said there's a story there, too.
There's a story there. I'm one of three children. I had older parents. My father was 40 when I was born, so I had older parents, lived through the Depression and the war. That made an impression on me. I went to Trent University in Peterborough for my undergraduate training. I studied with W.L. Morton, who was Manitoba's foremost historian. Then I studied at U of S, where I secured my PhD in 1982, a few years ago.
Yes.
And sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just good. And you've been there ever since, more or less.
I know I've left. I was at U of S until 2014. I was there for over 3 decades, and I left to be able to write and speak full time. I probably instructed about 3,000 undergraduate students, and I had 42 graduate students study under me, but I figure I'd done enough, and it was time to get out before I was told to go home.
Right. So
I left 5 years ago, and I've been busy. I run a business out of my home. I do professional writing and speaking, but I also do my own writing.
Ah, I see. So that keeps you busy, like you said.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now, did you do lots of reading and writing as a child?
I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of historical fiction. And at one time I thought of being a journalist, but I didn't go down that road, but I found myself coming full circle because I have a newspaper column, bi-weekly newspaper column in the Star Phoenix, so I am sort of a journalist.
Well, sure.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
And these days you can work from home anyway. So
that's right, yeah. So I write for a general audience. So my books are for a general audience. My newspaper articles are for a general audience. And if I can inform people and get them thinking and asking questions about the past, I've done my job.
So what made you select history as a profession?
Oh, I've always had an interest in history, so it was just a matter of what field of history, and I guess doing Western history makes sense because of my own family background, but I find it an exciting field. It's not boring. If anybody says it's boring, I don't think they know our history. And I find it fascinating to work in the area, and I particularly like tackling subjects that may have been studied before, but coming at them with fresh eyes.
Well, yes, that's the thing. I even remember sitting in the office when I was working in radio years ago, and the guy next to me says, "Oh, Canadian history is so boring." Those exact words. And I'm saying to myself, what does he want? Like explosions, wars, assassinations all the time, or just some really neat stuff that goes on that we don't know anything about?
That's right.
You've got a whole bunch of books out and a whole bunch of awards. And so what three honors, let's say, make you smile the most?
The Order of Canada, that was very nice. It was a tremendous honor. That was in 2017, and then just a year earlier in 2016, I won the Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction for my book, A World We Have Lost, Saskatchewan Before 1905. That was a shocker when I won that, but it was, I'm still smiling about that one. And recently I received the Governor General's History Award for Popular Media, the Pierre Berton Award, which celebrates bringing history to the people, and that was a nice one too. I've been very fortunate, though. I'll be the first to say that I've been very lucky, and what I do beats work.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of Pierre Berton, back in a previous lifetime, I interviewed him. I think it was in the early 80s. I couldn't have met a nicer guy. He was
good,
humble, and just a regular guy. He sat in the front lobby of our radio station in Vancouver by himself, waiting for me. And, we talked about Vimy Ridge and that kind of stuff. And, it just made a lasting impression on me. It's always, I think of him with fond memories.
Good.
So you have plenty of books, but I want to talk about three of them, and the one you've already mentioned was A World We Have Lost, Saskatchewan Before 1905, an award winner. So when you set out to do that, what did you hope to accomplish with that project?
Well, I had done the provincial history in 2005 that took the story from the creation of the province up to present day, and I felt at the time that the front end of the story needed to be told. So it took me a while to get my head around it, because I knew I had to do a lot of different reading and reading in other fields and think about it differently. And it wasn't the easiest thing to write, but I've tried to tell that story through an indigenous environmental lens, that there was an indigenous world here before the arrival of newcomers, and newcomers had to adjust to it. And the other feature of that book is that the environment is an actor in that story, and that it plays a part in our history. So I try to explain another world that existed before 1905 and how we saw the province in the 20th century. It was completely different before 1905.
Is there anything we as a population, as Canadians, as people who live in Saskatchewan, I've lived all over the place, the West Coast, born in Ontario, United States, is there anything we could have done differently right from the get-go to prevent the problems we have now?
I wouldn't say I'm not a believer in what-if history, okay? But I would say that we can learn from that pre-1905 history. I'll give you an example. In the 1880s, 4 out of 5 informal marriages were mixed-race marriages, either Métis peoples, Indian peoples, and whites, and I said 4 out of 5. And so it was a society where people from different racial backgrounds lived together and worked together. I'm not saying it was perfect. I didn't say we always got along, but they didn't see a problem or an issue with working together and living together, and we can learn from that.
And then the province was formed officially, and then
1905.
1905.
Yes. And from that point forward, this was to be a white Anglo-Protestant province.
Right, and then all the people came in to make grain and have farms.
That's right, and we
that.
turned our back on that pre-1905 situation. Indigenous people as of 1905 had no place in our future. So that's why I say we can learn from that period before 1905.
And another one that actually I have in my collection, Who Killed Jackie Bates? Now that one seems...
Who Killed Jackie Bates, that's right. That's an interesting story. It's the killing of Jackie Bates by his parents is often raised as an example of depression, desperation by parents. That they were driven to have this murder-suicide pact, and unfortunately for Jackie, he died and they lived, but it had nothing to do with the Depression. What the book demonstrated through using accessed information and getting the police and the investigation file, that this was a couple that was in a rocky marriage before the Depression came along. They were trying to separate, if not divorce. They didn't want to give up their son. And tragically, they used the Depression as an excuse for what they did. And so it's a human interest story that tells another side of that period.
And it was a bit of a departure for you, I think.
Oh, yes, it was. I wanted to see if I could write something along those lines. So there's a lot more dialogue, and it's almost like a murder mystery. So, yeah, it was different, but I enjoyed it, yeah.
Now, a story like that, how do you research something like that? What sources do you go to?
Well, I went back to the community and spoke to whoever I could, and through access information, I got the police files with police interviews. I had all the court documents, the testimony, the transcripts, and so I was able to piece it together. And I tried to make the reader feel that they were there and living it. So yeah, it's not an enjoyable read. It's a tough read, but as I said, it's a story that had to be told. Jackie's story. Exactly.
Now, Bill Waiser is our guest here today on Talking Books and Stuff, one of Canada's preeminent historians. We've talked about a couple of his books, World We Have Lost, Saskatchewan Before 1905, Who Killed Jackie Bates? It's a true crime story, I guess we'll call it, to put it into a slot. Yep. And another one that pops up is, again, I think a bit of a more interesting, or not interest, slightly departure. All Hell Can't Stop Us, the On to Ottawa trek and the Regina riots. So why that topic?
Well, my father in the 1930s was a guest of R.B. Bennett in a relief camp. That's what he used to say. My father did ride the rods. My father came from southwestern Manitoba, and he was right in the drought area, and so it was an experience my father lived. But why I did that book is that previous writings on that story did not have access to the police records. And because of the Access to Information Act in 1982, I used that legislation to access records that no one had used before. So I got the internal RCMP records on the Ottawa trek and Regina riot, and I was able to tell a much more complicated, if not messy, story about that event. And I also uncovered that it's often said that one detective died during the Regina riot. I found in the records that there was a second death, a trekker died, and that was covered up at the time.
So these books, they're all still readily available, I take it?
Yes, they are. They are readily available, and if I can put a plug in for one of Canada's best independent bookstores, it's McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. They've always been very good to me, and not only do they have a wonderful store, but they'll ship to anywhere in Canada. So those books are still in print and still available. And I should mention my new project.
Yes, well, that was another question.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's just gone to print today, and it'll be out in 6 to 8 weeks. It's called In Search of Almighty Voice. It looks at the Willow Creek man who was the most wanted fugitive in Canada in the mid-1890s. The book is really two parts. I went back to the original police and Indian Affairs documents to piece together what really happened. I also collected oral interviews from the One Arrow community. I've been working with the One Arrow community. So the book examines what I think really happened. And equally important, the book looks at how the story has been abused ever since. There's a lot of nonsense that's been written about Almighty Voice, a lot of things that have been made up about him. And I interrogate these stories and demonstrate where they are exaggerated. And the point of the book is that the story does not need to be exaggerated. The story in itself is important. We need to understand why Almighty Voice did what he did, And by understanding that, it can help bring about reconciliation today.
And you said it'll be out, that should be around the middle of May or so?
May, I hope that's right. And hopefully the world is back on its feet then.
Yes. Well, just in time for the May long weekend. So take it up to the lake or the cottage. And another plug for McNally Robinson, they also have an outlet in Winnipeg. So
that's right.
As far as I know. And that's funny because my next question on my list here was, what are you working on now? So
yeah, well, anyway, that's what I'm doing.
Okay. What's your daily routine, by the way? How does your day fit together?
I spend the mornings pushing paper, attending to whatever needs my immediate attention. I try and write 4 hours a day.
And you have
and you need to get away from your email. Mm-hmm. You need on my phone right now as we speak. My phone is at another location in the house. I've got a writing office that I can close the door and disappear for 4 hours. So in other words, if I can be blunt, you got to apply the seat of your ass to the seat of the chair and stay there.
That's right.
And 4 hours a day may not sound like much, but I can get a good piece of writing done, and it does accumulate. It's amazing what you can get done if you stick at it and gain some momentum.
And people always say that.
I do have a life, though.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I do have a life besides that.
Oh, good.
I do other things, but it's just my routine now.
So you have a separate space for the writing, like you said.
That's right. Yeah, I do. So I can just walk away and leave it, and sometimes I'll drift back in if I figured out a sentence or a section and revise that, but I have a separate space here.
And that's what they say.
In fact, I'm speaking to you from that space.
Oh, good. I hope I didn't interrupt anything.
No.
It's like the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice. That's
right.
How do you become a writer? Well, you write. You don't just dream about it and say, oh, well, one day, when I have time.
Writing's not easy.
No.
Writing's not easy. It takes work. A good sentence is a tough thing to do, but and you've got to apply yourself, but it is also very rewarding. So, yeah.
And when you write, do you use a typewriter, computer, longhand?
I have an old laptop. I've got an old, heavy laptop that I can pound away at. And, yeah.
So
I've worn one out already. I haven't worn this one out, so...
Well, I'm catching up to the 1970s because I've just suddenly discovered typewriters. So I have 3 in my collection now. So.
Okay, good. No, I find with the laptop, it's great for revising, editing, moving things around. So I think I'm a better writer.
And when you're not writing, do you have favorite music or movies or?
Oh, I'm very eclectic in terms of music, movies. I read every day too. I'll read nonfiction. I read mysteries. I think also to be a writer, you need to read and see how others craft words, and you need to get away from books full of jargon too. I think you need clear, accessible prose, and that's my goal.
And I lost my train of thought. If they've shot you off into space for a year, do you have 5 books you would take with you?
Oh, well, I'd like, there's a very obscure book called The Lark in the Clear Air, written by Dennis Patrick Sears, and it's about rural Ontario, and he wrote it in his 60s. And it's a wonderful book that really captures rural Ontario in the 1930s, and it's just a beautifully written book, great dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. That's one I would take for sure. And what's interesting is I read that every 5 years, and I've read it many times. Yeah.
And what's the name of it again?
The Lark in the Clear Air. Lark in the Clear Air, Dennis Patrick Sears, Sears.
Gotcha. And we were talking earlier about history. So what's your definition of history? A lot of people think it's just dates and stuff, but...
No, I think history provides an explanation of why things happen a particular way. History provides explanatory power, so it's not just dates and facts, et cetera, et cetera. I think by understanding why things happen the way they did, we can be better informed citizens today and be better armed to deal with today's challenges. We need that perspective on the past. Histories change over time, and my job as a historian is to explain how that change happened over time.
And we're talking with Bill Waiser today, Waiser. You have a website. Maybe you could plug that one more time.
Oh, BillWaiser.com. It's very simple. I post my articles there and other events, and it's a way for people to get in touch with me. So.
And one more thing before we go, the best piece of advice on any topic that anyone ever gave you.
The best? Be yourself and make the reader care. Why should I used to work on TV, almost 20 years ago, and I worked with a producer, and I can remember taking the producer's story ideas. I used to be the on-air host, et cetera, and he often said to me, Bill, why should I care? Make the reader, make the person care.
And that's kind of what I worked in radio news with a guy who worked in Los Angeles, and San Francisco and Vancouver, and he was pretty much the same thing. He said, when you're doing a news story, the listener should go, aha, I didn't know that. So basically, they got to care about your topic. It can't just be something that's off in Neverland because you like it, but might not appeal to the rest of the people. So you got to find a way to make them care. Bill Waiser has been our guest today here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, talking about his books, his writing, history. When do you find time again for your running? That's in the morning?
First thing in the morning. I actually, in the winter, I run with a reflective vest on. I'm an outside runner regardless of the weather.
Ooh. You obviously have protective clothing like warmth, and you must dress in layers then.
It's good.
Okay. Bill, thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.